She didn't raise her voice, she didn't stumble, she didn't hesitate. In front of the entire nation, Rep. Delia Ramirez looked the Homeland Security Secretary straight in the eye and delivered a line that sent a shockwave through the hearing room. "You broke the law, you abused power, and you are not fit to serve. I demand your resignation and I place it on the record." It wasn't a viral moment crafted for drama. It wasn't outrage for the cameras. It was something far more serious, something that felt like watching accountability collide head-on with power.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, it's good to see you. I'm going to go straight to the questions because I have a lot of them. Let me start just following up with Congressman Goldman about judiciary. Do you agree that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government and it is your obligation as a member of the executive branch to honor decisions made by the highest court of the land? Yes or no, Secretary?
We are
Yes.
abiding by all federal judges' orders, absolutely.
So yes, it's a co-equal branch of government. Okay, well, let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Do you agree that Congress is a co-equal branch of government and it is your obligation as a member of the executive branch to honor legislation and appropriations duly authorized by Congress? Yes or no?
Yes, that's why I'm
Thank you.
thrilled to work
Well,
for
let me
a
ask you the
president that is
follow-up question
enforcing
here because I
laws.
have a lot of them. Do you agree that Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse? Yes or no?
Yes, it is a duty
Do you
of
believe
Congress
that,
to be
let me
able
ask
to
you another
appropriate
follow-up, it's
funds.
just yes or no. Do you believe you have the power to disregard congressional appropriations and unilaterally repurpose funds that have been duly appropriated by Congress? Yes or no?
Ma'am, we are not doing that.
So the
We are
answer to
using
you is
dollars
no.
as to
All
how
right,
they
well,
were
it was a
appropriated.
yes or
We're
no,
ensuring the
Secretary. Let me
programs have
continue.
integrity.
Interestingly, you said no. But since you've been Secretary, you have repeatedly disregarded the law. You have illegally impounded funds that Congress appropriated and that your branch of government must implement pursuant to the law. Yet you've closed offices established in law, including the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, the Office of the Citizenship and Immigration Services, and you've canceled contracts for programs authorized in law, including shelter and service programs and citizenship and integration grants. You've obstructed and roughed up members of this committee as they attempted to conduct congressional oversight, and then you vilified them. But my question is, if they were so bad, why were they allowed to go in after to conduct oversight? Let me just continue. You redirected funds to terrorize our communities. You created taxpayer-funded political propaganda campaigns to terrorize families and children who don't sleep at night because of the terror of those commercials that you are putting out there. You hold sick, disrespectful press conferences in my state where, let me be clear, you are not welcome. You corruptly used emergency authority to avoid procurement to make Trump's private prison donors richer by directing $45 billion for them to expand ICE detention centers. You defunded work to address real threats to the homeland, all while you pursued college newspaper editors, labor leaders, and even a Harvard scientist who failed to declare frog embryos at the airport. Clearly, we don't have time for all my questions, so I have 13 pages worth of questions that I will be submitting to the record that I expect you and the administration to answer. But here is my final question to you. When you took your oath, did you swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America? Yes or no?
Yes, I did.
So I find it laughable. You don't behave like someone who takes that oath seriously. And let me tell you why. We don't live in a dictatorship or a monarchy. Trump's will is not the guiding doctrine of this nation, and our country is not a playground for his or your twisted authoritarian fantasies. We are a democracy. We defend the Constitution and we affirm the rule of law. We respect the co-equal branches of government and we uphold our rights, even when we disagree. The foundation of our nation is based on a core set of constitutional rights upon which our prosperity, our pluralism, and our peace depend on it. You, however, have been leading this work for 116 days. And in that time, you have profiled and dehumanized our neighbors. You've betrayed our constitutional commitment to due process. You've deported United States citizens. You've undermined the courts, you've broken the law, you've engaged in corruption, and you've weaponized the immigration system to violate civil rights. As Senator Murphy perfectly stated, your department is out of control. But you're responsible. You have betrayed the sacred fundamentals of your oath. And I believe to my core that you are not fit to hold the office. And I again, to your face, demand your immediate resignation. And I put it and place it on the record for all of us to see. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Generally yields. Mr. Gabarino is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. I'm the chairman of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection, so I work with CISA a lot.
And in the first 10 seconds you could feel everyone in that room shift, realizing that Ramirez wasn't simply questioning a cabinet secretary, she was building a case, brick by brick, allegation by allegation, and she wasn't going to let anything slip through the cracks. What came next was not a speech. It was a legal interrogation disguised as conversation. Ramirez didn't start with emotional appeals or partisan framing. She began exactly where constitutional showdowns always begin, the structure of the government itself. With calm precision, she walked the secretary through a series of yes or no questions designed to lock in answers that could not later be walked back. Do you agree that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government? Is it your obligation to honor decisions of the highest court? The secretary tried to soften her replies, but Ramirez refused to let her drift into vague explanations. She pinned her down with the simplest tool Congress has, the binary answer. And once the secretary agreed that courts are equal in authority and that their decisions must be honored, Ramirez moved to the next branch, Congress itself. It was the kind of questioning strategy lawyers use when they're trying to tighten a net around someone who keeps slipping between technicalities. Ramirez asked whether Congress is a co-equal branch, whether its appropriations must be followed, whether Article 1, the power of the purse, binds the executive branch. The secretary said yes every time, and those yeses mattered. Because once she acknowledged those constitutional truths, Ramirez could finally lay out the weight of what she believed this department had done wrong. Every yes made the next allegation land harder. Then came the pivot point. The moment the tone shifted from foundation to confrontation, Ramirez listed in steady, unwavering sentences the specific actions she claimed the department had taken: shutting down offices created by law, blocking programs Congress had authorized, and redirecting funds that had been appropriated for entirely different purposes. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She simply stated, with the confidence of someone who had studied every line of the statute, that the secretary had not just ignored congressional direction, she had allegedly worked around it. And in constitutional terms, that is not just a disagreement over policy. It is a potential breach of the very limitations that stop any administration from overrunning the system. But Ramirez didn't stop with the internal mechanics of government. She shifted outward to the human cost. She talked about communities terrified by enforcement campaigns that, according to critics and civil rights advocates, targeted people not for wrongdoing, but for fitting a profile. She referenced taxpayer-funded messaging that, in the view of immigration groups, promoted fear rather than public safety. She accused the department of creating an atmosphere where families weren't just anxious, they were living in a constant state of alarm. And while all of this has been hotly debated, Ramirez presented it as a larger pattern of behavior, a department that in her view had lost sight of its purpose and aligned itself instead with a strategy built around intimidation. Her allegation that U.S. citizens were caught in deportation sweeps was not framed as a mistake. It was framed as the product of a system stripped of safeguards, oversight, and accountability. Critics have long argued that when enforcement becomes detached from due process, errors stop being errors, they become inevitabilities. Ramirez was tapping into that fear. She was telling the public, this isn't just about the law, this is about real people harmed by actions that were never supposed to happen in a constitutional democracy. And then came the corruption claims, the part that made the room tighten. Ramirez argued that emergency authority had been used as a loophole to steer massive contracts toward private detention companies linked, according to political reporting, to donors aligned with powerful interests. She said billions had been funneled to those companies through fast-tracked oversight-free channels. Now, to be clear, for compliance, these claims are allegations raised in political discourse, supported by speculation, public reporting, and critics' interpretations of procurement data, not proven wrongdoing. Ramirez framed them as an abuse of authority, a distortion of emergency powers meant for genuine crises, not as tools to enrich connected actors. And the fact that she put it on the record, in writing, meant she intended for this to be examined far beyond a single hearing. If the opening minutes were a legal briefing disguised as a confrontation, the closing minutes were a moral indictment disguised as a statement of fact. Ramirez reminded the secretary of her oath, not as a ceremonial gesture, but as a binding commitment. She said, "We don't live in a dictatorship. We don't live in a monarchy." Those weren't just lines, they were warnings. A democracy does not function when one branch decides that oversight is optional. A constitutional republic does not survive when the executive can shut down legally required offices simply because they are inconvenient. A free society does not tolerate public funds being shaped into scare campaigns that target communities who are already living with enough fear. When Ramirez said, "You don't behave like someone who takes that oath seriously," you could almost hear the oxygen leave the room. Oversight hearings often devolve into political theater, but this was different. It wasn't the volume of her voice, it was the clarity of her message. She wasn't telling the secretary she disagreed with her. She was telling her she believed she had abandoned the principles she had sworn to uphold. And that is the kind of accusation rarely spoken in Congress without consequences. Yet the most striking moment wasn't the accusation, it was the resignation demand. Not asked quietly, not implied, not suggested, but placed on the record, formally, officially, unmistakably. That's not a viral soundbite. That's a precursor to potential inquiries, investigations, and long-term oversight battles. It signals that the conflict isn't about a disagreement on enforcement priorities. It's about whether a cabinet official can operate within the bounds of legislative authority, constitutional limits, and civil rights protections, and what happens when an elected member of Congress believes those boundaries have been crossed. For anyone watching closely, the exchange revealed something larger happening beneath the surface. This was not about one secretary or one department. This was about a struggle over the limits of executive power itself. When Ramirez drilled through the yes or no questions, she was pulling the debate back to first principles. Who controls spending? Who sets the law? Who must answer to whom? And what happens when those lines blur? It was a reminder that these hearings are not just political interactions, they are stress tests on the Constitution. Ramirez questions, co-equal branches, judicial authority, congressional power, were the questions asked when lawmakers believe the executive is stretching beyond its bounds. The hearing wasn't simply scrutinizing a policy, it was weighing the balance of government itself. And as Ramirez spoke, the contrast between her controlled tone and the severity of her accusations created a kind of unease that lingered even after she finished. She didn't need to shout. The allegations were loud enough: civil rights violations, fund misallocation, shutting down mandated offices, ignoring appropriations, overstepping constitutional limits. True or not, proven or not, those accusations carried weight because they were structured, documented, and delivered with the intent of building a trail for future accountability efforts. For viewers, the moment served as a reminder that oversight isn't a courtesy, it's a constitutional requirement. When Ramirez dropped her final line, "I demand your immediate resignation and I place it on the record," she wasn't just speaking to the secretary. She was speaking to Congress, to legal analysts, to civil liberties advocates, and to anyone who has watched government power expand beyond the reach of the people it serves. What unfolded that day wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a confrontation between two visions of government, one governed by limits, safeguards, courts and Congress, and another shaped by broad executive authority, emergency powers, and rapid enforcement operations that critics claim blur the lines of legality and morality. Ramirez's message was clear: the first vision must win if democracy is to survive. And whether you agree with her or not, one thing is undeniable: this moment will not fade quickly. It has already become a reference point in debates about civil rights, executive authority, congressional oversight, and the boundaries of governmental power. The resignation demand wasn't a dramatic flourish, it was a line drawn in ink, in public, and under oath. If you want more breakdowns that go beyond the headlines and explain what's actually happening inside these hearings, what's legal, what's political, and what's at stake for real communities, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and hit the like button. The more we understand what's unfolding in these rooms, the more prepared we are to hold power accountable in the open. Stay tuned, stay informed, and thank you for watching.